In the quiet hours before dawn on September 8, 2019, a colossal shadow loomed over the waters of St. Simons Sound, Georgia. The MV Golden Ray, a towering car carrier laden with thousands of vehicles, was listing dangerously. Just moments later, the unimaginable happened. The ship rolled onto its side, trapping 24 crew members inside its twisted hull. What caused this modern Leviathan to capsize in one of America's busiest shipping channels? And how did a routine voyage turn into a nightmare unfolding beneath steel and seawater? The Golden Ray disaster was more than a maritime accident. It was a complex tragedy of human error, mechanical failure, and the unforgiving forces of nature. A stark reminder of how fragile the giant machines of global trade can be. In this video, we'll piece together the final voyage of the Golden Ray, relive the desperate rescue mission, unravel the findings of official investigations, and reveal the extraordinary salvage operation that followed. This is a story of catastrophe and courage, loss and recovery. A tale from the deep that continues to ripple through the shipping world today. The MV Golden Ray was no rusted relic of the past. She was modern, sleek, and seemingly reliable, the kind of ship designed to disappear into the routines of global trade, avoiding the spotlight and newspaper headlines. Built in 2017 by Hyundai Mipo Dockyard in Ulsan, South Korea, the Golden Ray was a roll-on a roll-off vehicle carrier, or Ro-Ro as they're commonly called. She was just under 200 meters, or about 660 feet long, with a beam just over 35 meters, and could carry more than 7,400 cars across her 13 decks. Her gross tonnage stood at just over 71,000 tons. She sailed under the flag of the Marshall Islands and was operated by Hyundai Glovis, a logistics subsidiary of the Hyundai Motor Group. Like many car carriers, her primary mission was to shuttle vehicles between production hubs and global markets, a silent cog in the machinery of international commerce. At the time of the incident, she was just 2 years into service. She'd previously operated without major incident, moving between ports in Asia and North America with little fanfare. By all accounts, she was a dependable workhorse of the fleet. But that dependability masked a vulnerability, one that lay not in rust or wear, but in something more subtle: how she was loaded, how she was ballasted, and how her stability was calculated. In a ship like Golden Ray, the margin for error is narrow. Even small misjudgments in how weight is distributed across her decks can turn the entire vessel into a floating hazard. In the world of shipping, modern doesn't mean invincible. And on the night of August 8, 2019, Golden Ray would prove just how quickly things can go wrong, even for a ship in her prime. In the early hours of Sunday, the 8th of September 2019, the MV Golden Ray was preparing to leave the port of Brunswick, Georgia, on the southeastern coast of the United States. The skies were clear, the seas calm, and the weather gave no cause for concern. It was, by all appearances, an ordinary departure. Just after midnight, the vessel set off on what should have been a routine transit out of St. Simons Sound, bound for Baltimore, Maryland. On board were 23 crew members and a harbor pilot, and beneath them, a substantial cargo, over 4,200 vehicles, primarily new Kia and Hyundai models, destined for North American dealerships. At the helm was the pilot, Captain Jonathan Tennant, guiding the ship through the narrow channel as required by US maritime law. Conditions were ideal. Visibility was good, winds were light, and the tide was ebbing. Nothing suggested that disaster was looming. At 1:37 a.m., less than 40 minutes into her voyage, the Golden Ray began a starboard turn near the mouth of the Sound, a maneuver typical for vessels exiting this port. But almost immediately, something went wrong. The ship began to heel to port, a sudden, unexpected list. Within seconds, the list became extreme. Inside the bridge, the pilot and officers struggled to understand what was happening. The helmsman was ordered to apply full starboard rudder. Engine orders were issued in rapid succession, but nothing seemed to correct the tilt. As the angle increased, the gravity of the situation became clear. The Golden Ray was capsizing. Captain Tennant describes the moment he realized what was happening, quote, "When I felt like I was losing control of the vessel, I reached behind me where I propped up the ship's radio and said to fellow pilot Jamie on the inbound Emerald Ace, 'Watch out, Jamie, I'm losing her,' at which time she capsized. Within a minute, the ship was leaning more than 60 degrees. Furniture slid, alarms blared, and darkness engulfed compartments as electrical systems failed. Crew members, many of them off-duty and in their cabins, were thrown against bulkheads or trapped in their rooms." At 1:45 a.m., a distress call was made to the US Coast Guard. The message was simple but dire. The ship was listing heavily, and evacuation was underway. On shore, Coast Guard Sector Charleston immediately launched a response, dispatching helicopters, boats, and local emergency teams to the scene. By 2 a.m., the Golden Ray had rolled completely onto her port side, coming to rest in the shallow waters of St. Simon's Sound, with her starboard side exposed like a stranded whale. Half submerged and leaning at an unnatural angle, the vessel was eerily still, but there was still chaos ensuing within. 20 of the 24 people on board were rescued quickly. Some had climbed out onto exposed sections of the hull, signaling for help. Others had made their way to exterior decks or lifeboats as the ship tilted. For them, the nightmare was short-lived, but 4 crew members remained unaccounted for. Trapped deep within the engine room and lower compartments of the now capsized vessel, they faced an agonizing and uncertain fate. What followed was a tense, high-risk rescue operation that unfolded over the next 36 hours. Coast Guard teams worked in dangerous conditions. The ship was unstable, the interior dark and flooded in parts, with temperatures soaring due to the confined space and lack of ventilation. Rescuers tapped on the hull, listening for signs of life. Incredibly, they heard responses. Armed with handheld drills, thermal imaging, and cutting equipment, rescue divers and engineers began carving their way into the hull. Coordination was critical. One wrong cut could cause flooding, or even fire. On Monday afternoon, nearly a day and a half after the capsize, rescuers reached the first group of trapped crew. Dehydrated, disoriented, but alive, they were brought out one by one through a hole cut into the exposed starboard side of the ship. All 4 crew members trapped inside the vessel were saved. It was a rare moment of triumph in an otherwise grim episode. One member of the rescue team recalled, quote, "It was an emotional moment when the 4 crew members emerged from the capsized vessel. From the outside, the scene was surreal. A massive ship lay on its side in a busy shipping lane, with thousands of vehicles still strapped inside. The risk of fuel leakage, fire, and further collapse loomed large. But amidst the wreckage, one question hovered. How did this happen? The Golden Ray was not navigating in stormy seas. She was not overloaded, nor was she suffering from any known mechanical failure. The ship's engines had been running, the steering had been functional, the weather was benign, and there had been no collision or grounding or external force. And yet, in under 2 minutes, a 71,000-ton vessel had capsized. Initial speculation ranged from sudden cargo shift to human error. Some questioned whether the weight of the vehicles had been distributed unevenly. Others wondered if ballast water, used to stabilize the ship, had been incorrectly managed. It would take months for the truth to emerge. But what was clear, even in the immediate aftermath, was this. The Golden Ray had suffered a catastrophic stability failure, and she'd done so silently and swiftly, with barely any time for the crew to react. The port of Brunswick became closed to deep draft vessels for several days as salvage assessments began. As the Coast Guard established a safety zone around the wreck, the maritime world took notice. A ship this new, this large, and this modern should not simply tip over, certainly not in conditions like this. But the evidence was there. The Golden Ray was tipped on its side in the bay, and in doing so, she'd left behind not just a logistical nightmare and environmental risk, but a puzzle. One that investigators would spend the next year trying to solve. In the aftermath of the Golden Ray's dramatic capsize, the maritime world demanded answers. How could a modern, seaworthy vessel roll over in calm conditions just minutes after departure? The investigation was led by the US National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, in cooperation with the US Coast Guard, the flag state Marshall Islands, and representatives from Hyundai Glovis and the vessel's manager, G Marine Service, Co. What they uncovered was not the result of a single catastrophic failure, but a chain of misjudgments, the final link of which proved fatal. At the core of the incident was a critical lapse in stability management. The Golden Ray had been loaded with over 4,200 vehicles spread across 12 decks. These included large, heavy SUVs stowed on the upper decks, a decision that raised the ship's center of gravity. While this alone wouldn't necessarily cause disaster, the problem was compounded by insufficient ballast in the ship's tanks. Ballast water is essential in roll-on, roll-off vessels, which are inherently more top-heavy than conventional cargo ships. Ballast water acts as a counterweight, lowering the center of gravity and providing the vessel with the righting force needed to stay upright. On this voyage, however, the vessel departed port with less ballast than was required. Specifically, the tanks on the port side were not filled as planned. The officer responsible for the vessel's stability calculations, the chief mate, used an outdated version of the loading computer software, which did not account for recent changes to the ship's cargo layout. As a result, the vessel's actual stability was far worse than the calculated values suggested. When the ship made a starboard turn in the channel, the forces acting on the elevated vehicle load caused the vessel to heel, or to tilt over to one side. With insufficient righting force from the ballast, the list accelerated, and within seconds, the Golden Ray passed the point of no return. The NTSB concluded that the immediate cause of the capsizing was, quote, loss of stability during a turn due to incorrect determination of the vessel's actual metacentric height. In simpler terms, the ship was top-heavy and lacked the underwater weight to resist tipping over. Critically, this was not a case of technical malfunction or mechanical failure. The ship's engines, rudder, and navigation systems were all operating correctly. The weather was calm. The charts were accurate. The capsize was entirely avoidable, had the correct ballast been used, and had the stability been properly calculated. In the words of the final NTSB report, quote, the probable cause of the capsizing of the Golden Ray was the chief officer's incorrect determination of the vessel's stability condition. It was, in the end, a perfect storm of human error, carried out quietly, without malice, but with devastating effect. With the investigation revealing the how and why behind the Golden Ray's capsizing, all that remained was the monumental task of dealing with this mammoth of a ship lying on its side in one of the busiest shipping channels in the United States. With the cause of the Golden Ray's capsize understood, attention shifted to the immense challenge that remained, somehow trying to remove this 200-meter-long, 13-deck vessel, now lying on her side in a vital shipping lane. But this was no ordinary salvage. This was one of the most complex maritime recoveries ever attempted in US waters. And behind it lurked an environmental time bomb. At the time of the incident, the Golden Ray was carrying more than 4,200 vehicles, as well as approximately 1.1 million liters of fuel and various other hazardous fluids. in the hot, tidal waters of St. Simon's Sound, that cargo posed a very real threat to the surrounding marine environment and the coastal communities that depended on it. Salvage crews couldn't simply tow the ship away. Its position, weight, and unstable condition made refloating it impossible. The solution, though ambitious, was straightforward in concept: to cut the vessel into 8 giant sections and remove the ship piece by piece. To do this, engineers constructed a floating gantry system known as the VB-1000, equipped with massive chains and lifting gear. Each cut would slice through not just steel, but whatever lay inside: cars, machinery, wiring, and fuel tanks alike. The wreck wasn't being dismantled delicately, it was being ripped apart. This raised serious environmental concerns. Cutting through decks and vehicles would inevitably release fuel, oil, heavy metals, and debris into the sea. To mitigate the risks, the salvage team deployed a broad array of protective measures: floating containment booms, filtration nets, skimmer vessels, and dedicated shoreline monitoring units. A unified command, led by the US Coast Guard, the Georgia Department of Natural Resources, and Hyundai Glovis's own contractor, Gallagher Marine Systems, coordinated efforts around the clock. Despite their best efforts, though, some pollution did occur. Local beaches, particularly on St. Simon's and Jekyll Islands, were closed several times due to oil sheens, debris, and vehicle parts washing ashore. Crews conducted repeated cleanup operations, removing contaminated sand, oil-soaked seagrass, and occasionally entire vehicle components from the surf. Environmental groups raised concerns about the long-term impact on marine life, particularly dolphins, fish nurseries, and oyster beds in the Sound. A few local species showed signs of minor contamination, but extensive wildlife deaths were avoided. The aggressive containment strategy was largely effective. Captain John Reed of the US Coast Guard, who oversaw much of the response, acknowledged the scale of the operation. Quote, "The complexity of this operation is unlike anything we've seen before. It's not just about removing a ship. It's about protecting an entire ecosystem." The final section of the Golden Ray was removed in October 2021, over 2 years after the vessel first rolled onto her side. In total, the salvage operation cost hundreds of millions of dollars and required thousands of worker hours from divers, welders, engineers, and environmental technicians. To this day, questions remain about whether a more environmentally cautious approach could have been taken, but given the condition of the wreck and the risks of doing nothing, most experts agree the operation was a qualified success. The most severe ecological disaster was averted, though not without cost. The removal of the Golden Ray wasn't just a feat of engineering. It was a test of human resilience, environmental responsibility, and the high stakes of modern maritime trade. When the Golden Ray was finally cleared from St. Simon's Sound in 2021, the physical wreckage may have been gone, but the financial, legal, and reputational aftershocks were far from over. In total, the cost of the Golden Ray disaster is estimated to have exceeded $800 million, making it one of the most expensive shipwrecks in modern history, not involving loss of life. While the vessel itself was valued at around $62.5 million, the far greater loss came from the cargo. Over 4,200 vehicles, primarily manufactured by Hyundai and Kia, destined for markets across the Americas. Estimates vary, but based on average export values, the destroyed cargo alone likely cost Hyundai Glovis upwards of $70 to $150 million. The company absorbed the loss through insurance, but the incident served as a major blow, both financially and logistically, to their roll-on or roll-off shipping operations. There were also the direct salvage costs, which soared well beyond $400 million due to the complexity and length of the operation. On top of that were legal fees, environmental response costs, port disruption losses, and the mounting pressure from regulators and the public. Ultimately, the National Transportation Safety Board and the US Coast Guard released their findings in 2021, concluding that insufficient stability calculations, inadequate oversight of cargo loading, and poor communication between the ship's officers were primary contributors. Although no criminal charges were brought against the crew, the fallout prompted renewed scrutiny within the industry over training, oversight, and stability compliance. Hyundai Glovis responded by enhancing its cargo securing procedures and internal safety reviews. Meanwhile, regulatory agencies issued fresh guidance on vessel loading protocols, stability software use, and bridge team management. From a broader perspective, the Golden Ray incident became a case study in both what can go wrong at sea and how professionals can respond when it does. The coordinated salvage and environmental mitigation efforts, though costly, prevented a much larger catastrophe. As for the crew, all 24 members ultimately survived, though some were trapped in terrifying conditions for more than a day. The 4 engineers rescued from inside the overturned hull were later commended for their calm under pressure, one of the few bright spots in an otherwise harrowing ordeal. Today, the wreck of the Golden Ray is gone, its steel sections recycled, and the shipping lane once again clear. But the disaster left behind lessons etched into the industry's memory about stability, vigilance, and the fine line that separates routine passage from full-blown catastrophe. In the end, the Golden Ray's story is not just one of failure, but of resilience, coordination, and the extraordinary lengths taken to correct a calamitous turn of events.